For the past 2.5 years, I've owned a modded Nintendo Switch. If you can't tell by the recent content that's been posted on my channel over the previous month or so, I've been really into playing handhelds lately, and the Switch is no different. I picked this thing up, like I said, about 2.5 years ago with the intention of modding it. I went on my way to buy a specific console serial number, one of which could be modded with a little plastic jig. You just slide down the right Joy-Con rails, do some software stuff on the computer with your micro SD card, and get this thing up and running on custom firmware. Now, a little sidebar here, there is only certain consoles that are able to use the jig, do the software method to get it modded, even on the most current firmware, because this is a hardware exploit, though not some kind of crazy one where you need to take the system apart in any way or start soldering stuff together. It's not a mod chip, though mod chips are available and can be used on a wider range of systems. What I'm talking about is just having an early model Switch with a serial number that falls into a certain range, and I'll have a link down in the description if you want to check if yours maybe is and falls into that range. Otherwise, buying a console that has a moddable serial number has become relatively difficult over the past few years, though not entirely impossible, because you will periodically see people selling consoles that have a moddable serial number and they just simply have no idea, and they're selling it at just the regular Switch price, though oftentimes if people are aware they have a moddable Switch console, they'll sell it for more. But my biggest problem with owning a modded Nintendo Switch isn't the fact that I run the risk of being banned from Nintendo's online services, of which I've never actually signed up for on this console, and I'm not really concerned anymore about being banned because I really truly have no intentions of ever putting this console online. Rather, my issue comes from data corruption, and it's became increasingly common as I use more and more homebrew on the system, and when I get away from using homebrew and just use it to play Switch games, which, haha, that's what it was intended to do, it doesn't seem like I have any of those issues. I was very excited about being able to play RetroArch and just a ton of retro games on the Switch. Its versatility from being a handheld and something I can play on my TV was the reason why I thought this could be the ultimate retro setup, and instead, I'm left feeling like the Wii U was probably the better option. It seems like as, maybe say a month of using some of those homebrew applications or some of these game mods go by, I'll end up with little folders that end up being corrupted in the system, or games that won't start up, especially if they were games that at one point in time I had used a mod on, be it like Pokemon Diamond. I had used some mods on there in order to get the Pokemon to evolve at certain levels rather than having to do trade evolutions, and before I'll know it, I'll find that my 256GB micro SD card has completely corrupted itself, and I now need to reformat it, and fortunately for me, redump the backup I created, because I do periodically create backups of the micro SD card for my Nintendo Switch, just so that if I run into this issue, and it seems like I do, say every 3 months, unless I just stay away from homebrew in general, I end up with this corrupted memory card, and I need to dump the backup onto it. It's became the most annoying aspect of owning a modded Nintendo Switch, and the reason why I feel like if you want to play retro games, the Nintendo Switch isn't it. I mean, at its price point, obviously your phone kind of beats it out as a better option, but ultimately, the Wii U has this all-inclusive Nintendo experience. If you want to play any of the games that came out in the Wii U era or older, including the GameCube, which the Switch can't do, you can do that on the Nintendo Wii U, and it doesn't seem like it has as many of those corruption issues, especially because you can just launch a lot of those games straight from the home screen using a custom launcher that you can make for yourself on your computer. I know there's a ton of faulty micro SD cards out there in the marketplace, but I've even tried another one. Both SanDisks, both bought from Best Buy and not online. And as I've tested using some programs on Windows, both very legitimate micro SD cards that should hold and store all the data I throw at it, yet the Switch continues to have this issue unless I only play Switch games on the Switch, which again, I understand that's the main point of the system and what it was designed to do, but the bugginess of some of this homebrew software, or maybe just the bugginess of the way it connects and reads the micro SD card, I'm not entirely sure. And while I have cut down just FTPing software between my Switch and my computer rather than actually ejecting that SD card, it still seems like I run into these problems periodically, and if you don't have a backup, this could be a real crushing blow to owning a Nintendo Switch that's modded if you don't get annoyed enough about the software updates which are a whole nother issue. If you want to play some newer games, you have to have the current firmware, and periodically you will have to take the time to update your system to the newest firmware, which is really a challenge because it's a whole big process. You can't just simply download the update. You need to download the update, you need to move over some atmosphere files, and when I say download the update, you need to do it on your computer, and then you need to install it in a certain way in order to safely get your system updated and up to the newest atmosphere version. It's a real pain to update. I know that a lot of people that have modded Nintendo Switches try to put off updating as long as possible because you don't have to be on the exact newest firmware to play new games. Most of them will allow you to play on a little bit older firmware, so you can kind of sit on one firmware for, say, 6 months, a year. Kind of depends on how quickly Nintendo is pumping out new updates. And while it is neat that you can update a modded system to the newest firmware, it is a real hassle to do so. Maybe it's one of the biggest stumbling blocks of owning a console that's modded that's still getting new games released for it. In the time that I've owned my Vita here recently, I haven't had any of these problems, not only because the micro SD card that I'm using in the SD to Vita adapter has not corrupted or had nearly the same amount of issues that it seems to have had on the Nintendo Switch, but I've also haven't had to worry about updating the firmware, and that's the case with most of the modded consoles I've owned. The PS3 got one random update like in 2021, just out of the blue, but besides having to overcome that on the PS3, most of the modded systems I have, I never actually take the time to update because there aren't newer updates available for them. I modded them after the systems were already at the end of their life. So if you're someone that's been on the fence about modding a Nintendo Switch, and especially if you don't already own a console that is moddable and you're trying to go out of your way to get one, it's really cool. It's cool to own one. It can do a lot of neat stuff, but just know that there is a lot of risk involved as far as, having file corruption and having to deal with those software updates. And because of that, it's a very good idea to keep a backup of your micro SD card on your computer, on an external hard drive, something like that, so that in this seemingly foregone conclusion that you will eventually end up with a corrupted micro SD card, you can at least get it backed up very easily because you have a good copy of it stored on your computer. If you have to go back and re-download a bunch of games, it can be a real pain, but just know that it's kind of one of those things you have to overcome if you want to own a modded console that's still actively having, games and new firmware released for it. These are kind of the stumbling blocks you're going to have to face. So if you're just into it for the old retro stuff, I recommend going with the Wii U. I know the Wii U's price has kind of gone up over time, and probably will continue to due to the few of them that are out there in circulation compared to something like, say, the base Wii, which is a great value console in its own right. But if you want to have that handheld experience, I think the Wii U can give you that you're looking for in the Switch, but in a more stable platform that offers you, again, all of those old Wii games and GameCube games and things like that you wouldn't necessarily be able to get on the Nintendo Switch anyways. You'll miss out on the newer titles, but you have a great plethora of older titles there, and you won't have to deal with all of these hassles, I guess I would say, that come with having a modded Nintendo Switch. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.